this is a Creality CR10 3D printer. It uses like 1.75 millimeter plastic filament, but the main reason I got it was actually rather cheap for its large printing area, which is 300 millimeters, 300 millimeters, and 400 millimeters. So roughly 12 by 12 by 16 inches, I believe. So it has a pretty decent printing area for a 3D printer, especially at the cost. So inside the box, after getting the tape off, you have pretty much everything you need to build it. As you can see here, there's the heating bed. It does have a heated bed, which is quite nice. Makes it a little bit easier, apparently, for you to actually print onto the 3D printer in terms of stickiness for the object. I don't know if that's a great way to describe it, but this is my kind of first impressions. So on the second layer of the box, you're going to find the sort of arch at the top of the 3D printer that actually moves up and down, and the power supply, as well as a little toolbox and instructional manual, which was quite helpful while setting it up, but I believe it could be a little bit more improved in terms of changing filaments, but I'll get into that later. So let's get this thing set up here. Got our little toolbox, which has probably the most useful tool, at least in my experience of printing a few objects and getting used to this, was, well, really just a metal, well, scrapper sort of thing. But it has a nice picture in there, and you can actually kind of see what you need to build. There's the metal scraper thing. So you take the plastic wrap off, and you can slide back and forth on that axis. So, of course, it's three-dimensional, so we gotta add a top to it. So adding the top just has some screws at the bottom that you have to add, where you have to remove the zip ties. So I guess you need scissors, but it does actually come with some sort of wire cutting device. Or not wire cutting, but it's used to do the decorative rubber you can put on these, but I decided to just avoid that entirely. And it comes with a little bit of screws for you to set it up with. So most of this is actually pretty straightforward, but the wiring was a little bit confusing, mainly because they have a very basic sort of location for everything on the diagram, and it doesn't exactly show where everything is. But as you can tell, here is the T-joint and one of the cable attachments for the servos. They also have cable attachments for where the servos stop. So let's add the other T-joint to the side and get this thing completely set up. So it's actually looking like a 3D printer at this point. And now we have to deal with adding the spool, which is probably the worst part out of the machine, because this thing has jammed on me a few times, because it is essentially just like something that looks like a toilet paper roll, pretty much. It just hangs off there. Okay, so now that we have it set up, let's actually watch it print something. So you go into Control, and you essentially just have to preheat it. It will do that automatically on some of the G-code items, but it's always nice to preheat it, because you'll end up printing a lot quicker when you actually get to printing it. So preheat the PLA. I'm not really an expert on this thing, but I did have some issues with some of the test demos, which in this case I'm just printing a dog, mainly due to bed leveling. But eventually I got it down. The white filament comes out a lot cleaner than the glow-in-the-dark PLA filament I bought. So in the future, I think I'm just going to stick with ThinkPad black filament. But either way, it works kind of well at this moment, but it took me a few tries. I can show you the failed doggos at the end, but either way, it's printing this relatively fast, actually. But I noticed the best settings for getting the thing to print smoothly when the bed wasn't entirely level was to turn up the speed, which actually worked quite well, and the base temperature from 45 degrees Celsius to 60. I'm not really an expert on this, and this was actually my first functioning print, but I have tried a few other things, and we'll get to those in a second. But it's kind of impressive how it can just make a little 3D object, or even a larger 3D object. But that's the demo for the dog, and it's complete. And of course, since it's my first working 3D print, there has to be a blunder. So when I actually took the little chipped thing, I accidentally knocked the dog off. So let's talk about the items I've printed so far and their iterations. But before we look at the parts, let's first look at software. So I'm going to talk about, well, FreeCAD, because I designed a T23 lid, which is a few millimeters off, but I'm going to fix that later. I'm not the best user of FreeCAD. I'm quite new to the software. If there's a better free software alternative, I would probably consider it. But for the moment now, I'm using FreeCAD. And this is entirely made out of cubes. FreeCAD's pretty easy to use if you just want to make something simple like this. But yeah, you can just pen the cubes, cut the cubes. See, that one will actually combine two cubes. The other one will make a cut of the shape. And you can also, by that, it will take like the area of the cube and subtract it from the other cube. So that's pretty useful. And if you know how to do that, you can do some modeling. There's also some smoothing operations, but I didn't really use that there. So I used Cura to do the actual G-code generation, which is kind of what CNC and 3D printers use to actually print out an object. So Cura will actually generate that. I tried, I think it was called Slicer, not quite sure. Here's a picture of the T23 lid in Cura. You need to generate support and, well, add build plate adhesion if you're making something that's just like a complete vertical thing. So I guess that kind of sums up my software usage for this. So after that, I stuck it on a SD card and printed it out. So, okay, let's talk about the things I've printed so far. So first is the glow-in-the-dark bezel. And if you're wondering what one of those looks like when it comes out of the machine, this is an X200 bezel. I didn't design this part. I got it off, I think, Thingiverse. I believe that's the correct site. But as you can tell, I'm having some slight leveling issues. But I heard there's like an auto leveling part I can get. I'm a little bit new to, I guess, this whole 3D printing thing. But I was able to get a decent rendition of this. And it's a little bit harder to use the glow-in-the-dark PLA, but I did actually manage to succeed on that after a few tries. Here is a failed attempt. A little bit too inaccurate and stringy, but I just slowed the print speed down and got something that was a little bit better, and now I know how to print them. So I can print X200, I guess, hard drive cover caddies, which is pretty useful. The other things I print so far are like, it's pretty much just, oh, the test demos. We got a piggy bank without a tail. It actually doesn't appear to be designed with a tail at all. So it's pretty strong, I think. I mean, it is a spear though. I don't know if that's considered cheating. It's a very structural object. And I made a little dog. Let's see if I can get it to focus. So yeah, dog. Made a piggy bank that glows in the dark, and a, what is this? What else did I make? Oh yeah, here is, I didn't actually succeed with printing it completely because, well, you see this little roll thing, a spool? on the CR10, one of the design issues is that roller makes it very hard to print larger objects. It actually got up to about here, but I ended up breaking up part of it just so I can test the fit. But it is at least a portion of the bezel that I'm missing. And it's a millimeter too long there and a millimeter too long here. So I will remedy that with the next print. So yeah, I guess that sums up everything about this. I mean, this is kind of my first introduction to 3D printing. I also think I'm going to print out some parts to actually improve the spool carrier over there next, and possibly I heard that you'd get better results if you made something to get this vent fan to point down. So those are high on my list of, well, improvements to the system. And then the other is some sort of auto leveling attachment, but I actually have to order that from China. But that should allow it to compensate for some of the bed leveling. And after you have one of those auto leveling things, you can actually, I've heard people even replace the springs here, so with like solid spacers, and if you do that, you can get apparently pretty reliable prints all the time, or at least not all the time, but most of the time. So, a few design issues, and I'll remedy them, and then I'll got a 3D printer, and soon I'll be able to make cases for things, which was the main point of the 3D printer purchase. And caddies, and maybe if I get like some scanner sort of like 3D scanner sort of software, I can even make glasses frames because they break after a while. Anyways though, have a good one and peace.